the next thing we're gonna have actually a 45-minute fireside chat, and I'm really excited to have both Doug North Cook as well as Robin Hunicke, both of which are university professors in the realm of intersecting and teaching different aspects of immersive design, video game design, just design in general. So I'd love to maybe have each of you introduce yourselves and a little bit of your journey into VR and your connection to the design space.
Doug, you go first.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm Doug Northcook. I'm the program director and assistant professor of immersive media at Chatham University here in Pittsburgh, where I run an undergraduate program focused on immersive technology design. I started working with VR when the Oculus DK1 showed up at a friend's house back in 2013, and I put it on my head and I was like, this is really weird. We should just do this now. So I stopped doing all the other stuff I was doing back then, which was mostly like web development and some real-time 3D work. And I've been doing that ever since. So.
Nice. And Robin.
Yeah, I guess I'm a game designer and a CEO now. I've been running my own company, Phenomena, for 9 years this September 26th, which is technically, we call it Awesome Day. It was the first day that we were ever given actual funding to make our own actual things and weren't living off of our savings. My co-founder, Martin Middleton, and I met while working on Journey. And then decided to build a game company that was as joyful and diverse and inclusive as the titles that we like to make. So it's actually been really an amazing process, kind of going from just the two of us to now over 30 people. We have done a sort of unusual thing. We bootstrapped the business, but decided to focus on building technology for new platforms, games for new platforms, basically, because we realized that it was going to be kind of difficult to keep getting permission to do the weird thing on the sort of standard kind of gaming publishing platforms. And so we moved initially into VR, started working with Oculus when it didn't even have hand track controllers, and then shipped Luna on the Oculus through our research with hand track controllers, really got into that notion of embodiment, and have actually created several games for that platform, two of which are currently unreleased, but hopefully released this coming year. And then in addition, we worked on Watam with Kate Takahashi. So making games about connecting and creativity and thinking about how just new technologies enable new ways of connecting. And so in the last year, we've actually done a lot of work on the newest platform in our portfolio, which is Roblox. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about the way that people can play when they're also engaged as creators, and the ways that you can build experiences that, across a variety of like brand experiences, new creative experiences, new IP, educational experiences, creativity platforms, essentially inside those environments. And my ultimate goal is that eventually you'll be able to play one of my Roblox games in VR. So we'll see how that all works out. But I'm a lifelong learner. I'm a Buddhist, so I'm just going to do this. We can all just hold some space for having a conversation and being able to be with each other virtually, even though we're not together in person, which is much more fun. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Well, this is the WebXR Design Summit, and when I thought about the designers that I look to and always enjoy talking to, you two immediately came to my mind, and are both engaged in teaching and taking stuff that is at the frontiers of not really having things settled yet, but yet you still need to somehow convey to students these ideas. And I know, Doug, you had a number of different people come in and give a series of different seminars. I know I gave a lecture there at Chatham University. And so maybe we could go into the kind of theory of design and immersive design and experiential design. And what were some of the things that you took away after listening to all these different immersive creators come and give a speech about the frontiers of experiential design?
Yeah. So we ran this new course at the university last in the spring, which was intended to be an open public lecture series, but COVID had its way with us, and we pivoted it and made it just on ground for our students. But I still brought in all of the same people, which created a pretty unique experience for them to have these really intimate encounters with people who are kind of working out at the edges of this kind of work. But the intention of that seminar was to bring people not just who are doing virtual reality games or even working in VR at all, but to bring designers from different disciplines that can speak into that work. So that meant bringing in architects and sculptors and theater designers, and also a couple of VR people as well. But really trying to understand that when we're creating virtual reality experiences, we're doing exactly that. We're designing an experience. We're not just creating a piece of software. It's not, it has this different capacity to put people in a place and to create memories and to create connections. And I know a lot of software developers, and I wouldn't say that all of them are the best people at like doing that work of like building connections. And I think there are certainly developers who are doing that, but people that have a long history of doing that exist in other disciplines that have this rich, deep history of designing for the human experience. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing and a lot of the work that I do with my students is, how can we go out and find these other places where the thinking already exists, and how can we bring it in and adapt it and reuse it and remix it in a way that that's really going to make the experiences that they're working on feel really connected, really grounded, and really impactful. And I've been seeing that with my students. We did this great research project over the summer where I got some funding for some of my undergraduate students to work on a design dialogue project where we had an architecture student and an immersive media student working on the same projects together and just handing designs back and forth from their medium and having to retranslate them back into other mediums. So taking an architectural drawing and turning it into a 3D model, and then turning that into an audio file, and then turning that into watercolor, and then turning that into a VR experience, and doing that like dozens and dozens of times over weeks and weeks. And the work that came out of that was like nothing that any of us had seen, because it was filtered through all of these different artistic and design mediums, which normally in the development process, you don't have the luxury of, daydreaming for weeks on end and doing watercolors. And so, yeah, so that's kind of some of what we've been getting into. I mean, I think there's, an exciting opportunity in academia to let students like really create and really explore the boundaries of what these technologies can be without, not that we want them to go so far out that they're not prepared to go into the workforce in a meaningful way, but that they really do have the freedom to do some of the work that professionals don't get to do. And I think that's been really exciting to watch. So
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and Robin, I know that being not only on the frontiers of making video games and all these new emerging platforms, but you've also been involved in helping to create some game design theory from the
Oh, totally.
mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics. So the mechanics, a lot of the different rules, but also the sort of the different aspects of your solving puzzles and mental and social presence. The dynamics, a lot of your active agency and presence. The how things change over time, and then the aesthetics with the sort of emotional core. And I know that you've centered a lot of things within the emotions first, and then build out everything around that. And so I'm wondering if over time you've also started to add in elements of the environment and embodiment into this sort of overarching framework of game design, because it seems like game design is going to be blended with other aspects of architecture and theater and cinematic storytelling and all these different disciplines. And so yeah, I'm just curious to see how the MDA framework, so mechanics, dynamics, and
Yeah.
aesthetics, if that's been evolving, and what kind of things you've been seeing at the frontiers of teaching your students these immersive practices.
Yeah, actually, so it's relatively exciting to be able to announce it, but we just collaborated on a huge departmental shift for our arts, games, and playable media at UC Santa Cruz. So after operating the program for 7 years independently at the level of the division, I've actually formed a shared department with my colleagues in theater arts, and so we have a new faculty now, which is a blended faculty of dance, theater, performance, dramaturgy, and critical practice that's founded in both games and theater and performance arts. And so we have already now the undergraduate major in game design and game production and game art. And now we also have this undergraduate major in theater arts. And we're basically creating a new hybrid shared curriculum to engage with both the undergraduate and graduate programs that we both sponsor. That's really going to be looking at the affordances of play, performance, and design as we create these new technological spaces. So I'll give you a couple of examples of where that research is headed. We have people that are working on open source libraries for African American hairstyles, AM Dark. We have people working in the space of embodiment and performance in terms of environmental challenges, Misha Cardenas. We have faculty that really look at embodiment and dance, and actually also tele-awareness. So people who have engaged in performance that goes well beyond the space of the individual dance theater. Ted Warburton, my colleague and also the acting chair in my division for many years recently, is a dancer who engaged in one of the first collaborative hybrid practices with a dance company in another location through telecommunications and video. And so what we're looking at is kind of exploding the notion of performance and performance spaces. So we have a black box theater that we're currently going to do a capital fundraise for to advance and be able to include like cameras, virtually racked essentially actors and performances through green screen that then can be projected into a theater space where the audience can engage with the theater. We have Michael Chembers, my chair, is a dramaturg who works on looking at how ancient performance styles like Japanese puppet theater really help us reposition ourselves in terms of thinking about what is really a performance and who the performer is in a performance. When you're sitting in all black silently puppeteering with three other people, like mom and Chance essentially, is the same thing. Who is the performance? Are the actors the performance? Are the puppets the performance? Where does the performance live? And what do we choose to see and not see? So we're really trying to take all of those aspects of looking at, critical race theory, thinking about, feminist pedagogies and deconstructing the notion of performance and the performance of self, and building out new platforms for engagement. So my own work in Roblox and in AR performance is really also engaging fundamentally new curricula. So I just came from a curriculum meeting for a new curriculum that we're proposing that is aiming to create a safe space for people that want to make a difference in technology and the way that it engages with people that are typically underserved. So looking at the ways in which creative technologies perform on us through the curated flows and the games that we play and the things we see on our Instagram and our Facebook, and also how we perform ourselves in those spaces. Like when I'm on TikTok and I'm presenting myself, or I'm reenacting something, or I'm reinterpreting a piece of work, how is that creating a sense of me, a sense of us, a sense of our identity as a collective? And so I think that games are really an interesting part of that space, but they're a small part and they're actually relatively new. So what I've been doing a lot is just thinking about how ancient technologies, like the stuff that Chummers has been studying as a dramaturg for 20 years, can inform my own practice, and how the way my younger colleagues who are really working at the center sort of race and ethnic studies and feminism with respect to these media can help improve my ability to sort of advocate for change and position different bodies and different performances of self in the space of AR, VR, and more traditional gaming. So I think it's a really rich time for students. I think you can really take these things in almost any direction and make a positive impact that changes the way we see the media itself.
That's really amazing, and it's really exciting to hear because it's a kind of a
We're
further of
hiring.
the.
We're hiring a tenured professor. So if you're out there and you're tenured and you want a really great job, it's current.
Yeah, well, it's the blending of all these different practices together that I think is really, at the frontier of what I see just generally happening with these immersive technologies is this interdisciplinary fusion between all these different practices. And I know, Doug, we've talked previously about practices of industrial design and ergonomics and just architecture in general has come up again and again today, and just generally as another practice that is about this designing of space. And it also has been a very interdisciplinary fusion of all these different practices and is kind of putting in more levels of interactivity and agency. And so, you had started to mention this blending of these different modalities and kind of almost playing a telephone game between, starting in one place and going in and see where you end up. But just be curious to hear generally if you see a similar trend there at Chatham University of this kind of getting the different departments to start to collaborate in some ways. And what I think of is kind of the spatial medium of XR is almost like the lingua franca of getting boiled down to the human experience, but all these different design disciplines that are kind of feeding into that. And what you're seeing from your perspective at Chatham University when it comes to that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I think we brought on two more full time people into our department this past year. One of whom is mostly working on open source tools, mostly around volumetric capture and some VR design practices, and the other of which Joseph Amodi, who's an amazing uh, activist and designer. Most of their work is focused on doing healthcare activism, like focusing on vaccine hesitancy. And some of these things. So part of what I've really tried to do is to encourage faculty to come in to our program, whether it's full time or part time people who are already taking an interdisciplinary approach and are practicing in spaces that I'm not necessarily like connected to or working in. I don't really have a foot in healthcare or in doing that kind of work, but then, I mean, my colleagues at the university, part of the magic of working at a university is that you get to work with all of these people in a way that you don't get to do if you're working at a software company. Like my colleagues are architects and biologists and poets and social workers, and they come from this huge range of disciplines and backgrounds and experiences and ages. And um, our department is the newest, the youngest. And so we're trying to do a lot of new things. We're trying to do a lot of new things very quickly, and we've been there for about 4 years now, and we're at the point now where a lot of my colleagues have started to show up, and they're like, "What is this? How do we do this?" Which has been really great. So we've had some really exciting interdepartmental collaborations that we've already done. We have new ones that we're talking about with the sciences, looking at science education. Um, we have a really great historic Women and Gender Studies Institute at the university, which Chatham was founded over 150 years ago as a women's college. And so we have this long history of feminist politics and thought and philosophy that have kind of been born out of the university. And so we've taken a lot of that into our department, and we have an ongoing artist residency that we run now. That's a collaboration between the the institute, the art department, and us, where we provide full funding for an immersive artist from an underrepresented gender identity to just come and get paid to produce work with no restriction from us. We don't tell them what to do. We just give them space and equipment and mentorship. And we're in this unique position, both of getting to kind of push where the conversation goes, but also create opportunities for people that maybe Adobe or Google wants to give them a residency. And that's cool. And they should definitely do that. But that comes with a lot of strings. You can't necessarily produce like really out there queer art if you're doing it under the guise of Google. So we've really, tried to create that space. So, but also, really trying to bring in the arts, but also trying to invite the sciences and our faculty in healthcare who have gotten really excited about these technologies. We actually put together a a dual degree program where students from our program can go right into a 1 year master's in healthcare informatics, which is like healthcare data science, where you could go and like work on really complex healthcare software and data problems if that's what you want to do, right? And trying to kind of forge some of those connections. And yeah, but that's why I think seeing what is possible with these technologies at the university level is so exciting, because you get the chance to kind of do little prototypes and experiment with how these technologies can interact with different disciplines in a way that's just it's almost impossible to do as an individual company, because you have to build those connections with those industries. But when you're at a university, you already have those people. You already have scientists. You already have actors and theater designers and industrial designers. All of that already exists. So it's been really exciting. And I mean, realistically at this point, there aren't very many universities still that are doing anything beyond, a few courses. And it's exciting, I think, to be engaging with this in, at the degree level, and bringing in research faculty, and really kind of letting these things take on a life of their own. So.
Yeah, also the libraries can get really involved now. Like, the university librarian at Santa Cruz, Elizabeth Cowell, has spent the last 5 years doing capital fundraising for digital research commons that all students have access to, where they can play Luna, or any other VR title on a headset that they just check out and take into a room. There's a green screen there. There's a wall, a data wall. They're currently building out a really fantastic fabrication space in the science library. And so it's like, she had the foresight to see that libraries need to engage on these platforms and give people who wouldn't normally even consider majoring in games, an opportunity to create um, experimental content for classes that can tell their stories in a better way. We had a dean's student recently that was awarded for creating a game maker title that has essentially helped her refine her arguments around where food deserts come from and what they mean for people of color in certain urban environments, where you're wandering around and you're engaging in the practice of planting seeds and then harvesting plants and eating those things and sharing them with your families and your friends, and looking at what are the systemic issues that come from living in a place like that. And that was out of a class that was taught in a college system by AM, where most of the students would never have considered using gaming technology to sort of create a more engaged argument or an engaged discussion about these issues. And so I think when you look at the university context, now is the time as a teacher, wherever you are, like, Christine, I really appreciate, like, we need more perspectives on these locations of activism and sort of coming to terms with the cultures that we've created inadvertently by innovating without really looking ahead. And so I think it's a really great time to be in the system of a college, a university, whether it's a private school, a public school, or a community college. There are so many ways to sort of create access and then share that access in a way that I think will really revolutionize the kinds of content and sort of opportunities that we see in the next 20 years.
Yeah, well, it's really an excited time, and I know that both of you are really at the stage of a lot of the new stuff that's happening for the first time in a lot of cases. But I wanted to maybe pull in some of the different aspects of WebXR and the web, because most of the stuff that's happening in the immersive industry has been in Unity, Unreal Engine, which are at the heart game engines. They're not designed to be, say, data visualizers, or pulling in different aspects of, open web APIs, or pulling in stuff from the web. And maybe Robin, looking at something like Roblox, which has, different aspects of, even though it's still an app, there's still kind of some aesthetics and interaction designs that are still kind of in that 2D mode of, you're in a 3D world, but there's still a lot of like 2D affordances that, may not actually translate over into VR if you were to do it one-to-one. And so it feels like Roblox actually could be one of the spaces where you kind of have this fusion, where you're kind of pulling in aspects of, chat or whatnot, with being able to have accessibility options, or yeah, I'm just curious to hear from each of your perspectives of how you see, what the web and web designers have to provide this larger immersive XR, design disciplines, which if all the different disciplines are probably the things that's going to be, last or, not at the frontiers, but, kind of pulling in, but still like, what is it about the web that is going to change the different design practices that we could see with where things go with WebXR?
Yeah, I mean, even as you look at sort of like say the pivot that Magic Leap did, right? They went from basically being, an entertainment content company to a working tools for productivity and access company, right? In their pivot over the last year, right? And they brought in this new CEO to kind of like re-envision, what does a headset like the Magic Leap that's going to still be kind of cost prohibitive for a everyday consumer, what does it need to do in order to perform in the space economically? What I think is so interesting is that there is an economic reason to do that pivot, but there's also like a fundamental reason, which is that we're all working from home now. And like it sucks. Like, the 2D screen environment is exhausting. It, even just the notion of space and volume of voice and the ways in which we position ourselves in 3 space and a co-working space versus when we're all in like, I mean, I'm in meetings sometimes at school, there's like 20 people on the meeting or 30 people on the call. And what you see is the hand raising and the chat. And like, it's just so difficult to even to teach your class. Like one of my classes is 180 kids, it's like, how am I going to teach 25 teams of 5 how to be making video games together when I can't walk around the room and play their games, right? I've really worked to innovate on the classroom side, and then losing the classroom and then having to go into a screen has been really difficult because you just get so much more data when you can sit down and play the game and talk to the team and feel it on the controller, or when you're playing a role-playing game and you see how everyone's behaving at the table. It's just so hard to get that out of the screen. So I think what WebEx and UX designers really have an opportunity to do right now is to be asking themselves, what aren't we thinking about, and how can we recreate these flows, embodiment, support the idea that certain number of people are not going to want to have their camera on. So what are the ways in which they engage that feels embodied and part of the conversation, but also gives them the space to not be doing this? I mean, some people just don't like to look at themselves. Some people don't have the privacy of a home. You see a lot of people in my community who have kids, their screens are blurred out, and then suddenly it's a child's face or a dog, or a grandparent, a caretaker. The idea of really thinking about what kinds of questions can we be asking ourselves about the affordances that are in this space. And then if we do get to a place where we have a headset that's comfortable that we can wear, when do we need to be using it fully? When do we need to be really up and about doing work? I think the thing I miss most about collaboration and my classroom spaces and my office right now is overhearing and being able to become part of a conversation that I want to become part of. It's so hard to have a party online. It's so hard to get a casual private conversation going between someone about a third person in the room. It's like 90% of our socialization and learning comes from having a dialogue about other things that are happening in the space. And you can't do this in this medium. And so I think really paying attention to where we feel fatigued, looking at what we miss. I just went to see Khruangbin at the Red Rocks in Colorado, and they did a 7-minute jam that was a tribute to Houston hooks and rap music, but they started it off with Elton John, Benny and the Jets, the first opening, chords of that song. And when you're in a concert hall and you hear those coming at you at full volume and they're shaking your body, you're like, damn, Elton John was good. Like he knew the venue, right? He knew the embodied feeling of hearing those chords. Dun, 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 on the keyboard, right? And we've created all these spaces for so long to be able to experience that, and now we're trapped in this, And so I think it's like we really have to be asking ourselves, like, fuck, like what are we missing, And how are we going to get that back if this becomes the new normal, as it seems to have done?
Kent, you trapped us here. You did this.
Yeah. I mean, we're starved for this, right? Like, it's so great to see you, but I really wish we were having a beer at GDC, I really
totally.
do, I'm not going to lie.
But I mean, I think with the web, Kent, the web is in this interesting place where it's become so cannibalized and like moved in so many directions, right? Like we saw this with mobile. The real question is like, what even is the web now? I think when most people are talking about the web, they're talking about like things that I access through my web browser. It's like cool, but really, I think what most people are actually talking about is all of the data that exists behind all of that, and most of that is just these massive databases, right? Whether it's a social media platform or Amazon, but all of that doesn't just exist on the web anymore, right? It's getting delivered on mobile apps, tablet apps, native desktop applications, and in some cases now immersive applications, right? So there's always going to be space for flat apps, right? Like no one's going to want to just like read a book in three dimensions, right? Like what does that mean, you know? Um, so really, I think for web designers, and even when we're talking about like like web VR and some of the really great work that that the team that's been putting A-Frame and some of the other really great frameworks together have been doing, right? Is what is the role of the web browser as we increasingly are not using the web browser to access most of our content, right? So, like if you look at the overall data usage for the average mobile phone user, the majority of time is not spent in the web browser. It's spent in dedicated apps accessing content that can also be accessed on the web, right? And not all of that, not all of those things are going to translate into what we would think of as an actual true immersive application, right? Like TikTok is a great phone app, right? It would be a terrible VR app, right? Because it's just scrolling video. I don't want to watch scrolling video in VR. Maybe I do. Probably not. So I think it's really thinking about what are the things that exist on the web now that would be better in an embodied and three-dimensional experience, right? I think the team at Shopify is doing amazing things, building these really innovative VR and AR tools for e-commerce, right? And that's an easy thing where it's like, oh, I want to buy an object that is three-dimensional. It would be great if I could go and look at it and walk around and maybe see what it looks like in my house, see what it looks like in a different house that maybe I would like to buy, right? Like there's so many of those experiences, but there's lots of things that shouldn't be moved to an immersive application and some things that, just are going to be a lot longer to figure out. But I think, I mean, realistically, if you're still a web designer and you're making a good living doing that, that's cool. I don't know how long that's going to last. We've seen this massive shift in the last like 10 to 15 years of the majority of, especially back-end web development, is getting outsourced to every other country in the world that's not in the US, because everybody has really great high-speed internet and they are as good or better than we are at most of this work, right? So
There's also the problem of the curation, right? Like I was reading an article from a colleague of mine who is essentially like a growth architect at larger companies. So she's worked at, places like Etsy, at like trying to think about how does the product grow as it becomes more of a product that people use online. And she was sort of saying like, we've all had the experience of using a web technology that seemed like a service and now just feels like it was designed by robots. Like it's not for humans to use anymore. The other day, my phone replaced Google as my main search link when I type in the Google search bar at the top of my phone. So suddenly I was in Yahoo search all the time. And I was like, wait a minute, what happened to all my searches? Why are they all bad? Like, the volume of data that goes through Yahoo versus Google is so small that the searches are all borked. It's just like, what's going on? And I end up having this feeling like my phone was not made for me. Like it was taken away from me by the apps and the flows and the curation and the desire to drive traffic based on agreements that I did not participate in. And I think that that's the other thing to really be thinking about is like, how are you providing an authentic experience to people, one that really does serve them, where they're getting what they need and not what you think they should buy, where not everything is a ranked stacked order search SEO battle. And I think that's actually that's going to be a big struggle for people working in straight web, and where entertainment content can kind of be a source of relief.
And I think it's one of the biggest questions with immersive technology in general is how is it going to be affected by the rapid decline of web ad sales and profitability. And as you know, uh, who knows what's going to happen, right? Is everybody going to wear AR glasses in 10 or 15 years? Maybe. But if they do, there's definitely going to be a really difficult economic structure that's going to be built up around it, like the web, right? Like the web is like Google searches are not curated, they are bought, right? Like your placement and your success, you can just buy it on the web. Um, Currently, that's not quite the same for like any closed ecosystem, like the PlayStation or the Oculus Quest or any of these things, right? But inevitably, that's going to have to shift dramatically. And
In some ways, it kind of is, right? Like, I mean,
Yep,
in the end, like the access to those platforms is really it continues to shrink as larger and larger service-based games eat up all the space. When you
right,
look at the top 10 titles on a PlayStation or the Xbox over the last 10 years, there has not been a lot of movement there because those are evergreen titles now. Like The Sims, they've learned that expansion packs and community engagement will keep you at the top of your game for a very, very long time. And so, how are we innovating? When you look at Roblox, it's essentially like a mall. You walk through it, you have conversations with your friends about what you're doing. It's kind of like going to Disney World with your own fake money and then having a good time with your friends. And that feels really fresh, in the same way that TikTok felt fresh compared to Instagram or Facebook, a couple of years ago. As those platforms become normalized and then competitors proliferate, what are we going to be doing in the future? This is I'm really actually quite curious to see where the web goes because it's getting a little bit oatmeal right now.
Yeah, well, I have one last conceptual question, and maybe we'll have some final thoughts at the end. But the thing that I come across again and again and again when I talk to different design disciplines is that there seems to be some competing approaches. Let's say, like the game design approach, rapid iteration, that you have to continuously play test, and you don't really know what the reaction is going to be until you get it into the player's hands. And something very similar with, say, web design, which has a very Scrum iterative approach, minimum viable product, sort of this agile approach, which is very iterative. Now, the opposite approach of, say, like making a film or building a building, which is much more of an architectural process that has pre production, production, and post production that is much more linear. And there seems to be this combination of aspects of storytelling, which come from that, or building spaces and architecture that's sort of being blended into this more iterative approach. And so I'm curious how you've started to see these almost competing design philosophies of rapid iteration versus kind of like designing everything out beforehand, how you see those two worlds clashing together, from architecture and
I,
design, theater, story, and game design.
Oh God, I have so many contemporary experiences right now and working in Roblox where we're working with partners who are traditionally in print media, people that are traditionally doing activations in stores, for example. And when you're working with a fashion brand and you're communicating like how does a game get developed and when does it hit its, peak viewability and like what does a rough look like versus, a layout for an advertisement might just be the photograph without treatment and some like tag copy that you're working through. It's not that you're literally building the models that are going to be, showing the clothes in the picture. And so what I see is that there's a huge opportunity for people who understand digital content creation and rapid iteration to move into industries that were currently closed before to these kinds of perspectives because they just didn't work in Roblox. Like even a year ago, if you had said to somebody, one of the most successful experience in Roblox is going to be a Lil Nas X concert, and the next most successful one is going to be a Gucci experience where you walk through a garden and then buy a purse that you wear on your character outside. Like literally no one would have believed you. Like I know because I was fundraising for it at the time. No one believed me. And now it's like there's just this huge gap. And like there are going to be so many industries moving into the space of digital content, engagement through VR, the metaverse, this kind of thing. You said the metaverse 2 years ago while fundraising, people would literally laugh you out of the room. They were like, whatever, have a good time with that. Sounds really cool. So is virtual currency. And now it's like everything is NFTs in the metaverse. So, like, I think you're really looking at if you're in this space as a student, there is a huge opportunity to break into an industry like fashion or cars, where you could be building content that would be like literally taking Ferrari from nothing to amazing in the metaverse in the next 5 years. So, like, I think it's actually a really great time to be in this space and to have the access to the tools that you have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, I think that's where like it's been really exciting seeing what my students want to do with these tools. So like I had a student who built a fashion experience last year. I have a student who's building a tarot deck that's a VR and AR app that also has a physical deck, and it's the taking physical products and putting them into digital spaces. And um I think there's what Robin's talking about, which is, these design like people from these disciplines going into these other places. And um, I think that is what is going to upend a lot of these, what we would consider to be like more auteur disciplines, like architecture. And I saw you had Andrea on a panel earlier today, who I think understands this better than anyone, that the ability to iterate with architecture when you can put people inside of a full 3D embodied rendering of a space, that is something completely new. And if the auteur architects really understood what that means, which some of the really great firms do, that they're already doing that, right? Like Zaha Hadid Architects has been doing all of their rendering and most of their work in Unreal Engine for like the last 3 or 4 years, because they know that that's where they need to be, and they're one of the most cutting edge firms in the world, and they're really digging in and doing that. And I think the the people that are going to last this transition, I think, are the companies that are going to not just embrace immersive technology, but also companies that are making really significant contributions and moves on the environment and on climate change. That it's not just about embracing new technologies and new ways of working, but also embracing the realities that we just can't keep living in the way that we used to. And immersive technology and all of this brings up so many interesting opportunities to solve some of those things. I mean, like Oculus's big tagline for their developer conference like 2 years ago was "defying distance," which was seems very strange now in hindsight, right? That like it's like, oh God, like if only these tools were like 5 years more mature 2 years ago. And
Yeah.
maybe we could have been doing this exact thing in like an embodied VR space and not on the web, right?
Yeah,
Like a traditional web.
it's actually been really amazing, like, if I mean, I know Kent, when we first started talking, I read The Uninhabitable Earth in, like, 2017, and went through this very long and involved process of introspection about phenomena and the program at school, and, like, what could I be contributing to the Earth as we rapidly were approaching the targets that people said we were only gonna approach in 20 years, right, And in the last 6 months, as we've seen climate disasters kind of, like, take over the space, like, it's just become more and more my conviction that we're working in the space where we have to assume adoption of these technologies. We need to assume that we're going to be co-working across distance to solve really massive social problems, pop-up housing, migration, social justice, ways of voting, ways of engaging locally when we're in disaster, because national or international systems can't help, right? We need to start to innovate on these kinds of collaborative collective actions in order to survive. And it's the generation coming through right now that's going to have the most investment in and control over those outcomes. Like, there's never been a better time to be doing this. It's so, so critically important that we use the tools that we have to create lasting change. And we don't just pass up this moment of a new medium and just continue to do what we have been doing, which is monetize and productize eyeballs. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not going to work. When you read about the laying down movement that's happening in China right now, where students are leaving school, moving to the remote areas, and just doing what they need to get by because they don't want to participate in an economy which is destroying their ecosystems and shortening their lives, literally. I think you're going to see more and more and more of that. And so, like, how can we be harnessing this stuff for a climate core that's actually repopulating trees and helping fish and wildlife living locally, but being entertained globally by games, concerts, and other kinds of media that are really going to keep our spirits up when we're done at the end of the day working in situ in our environments, trying to curb some of the damage that we've done. I think this is a really, really powerful question, and it's been great to be here to talk about it.
Yeah, and with that, we're coming to the end of our 45 minutes and our discussion here. So, Robin
And
and
what a
Doug,
great
thank
way
you.
to end. I thought that was an amazing message to end with. Thank you so much, Robin and Doug. That was really awesome. Thank you
Thanks
for
for
your
having
talk
us.
today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.